Sorry, Kevin, I cut you off there. But welcome once again to the Faces of Business. This is Damon Pistolka, your host. And with us today, I've got Kevin Williams. And yes, now we are live on LinkedIn. It's not giving me the dreaded red button of death. StreamYard has been having problems the last couple of weeks, but it looks like we're on live, so that's good. Welcome, Kevin. Great to have you here today.
Great to be here.
All right. Well, Kevin, we've known each other for a while now. Fellow people in e-commerce, you're a little bit deeper into it because you've had some businesses and such in e-commerce and developing brands and such. So awesome to get you and talking about the changes that are coming in privacy in the near future. So got some interesting stuff on the horizon, don't we?
Yeah, we certainly do.
Yeah. Well, so to get people started off, I always like to let you tell us a little bit about your background, so we can kind of understand what your journey and kind of how you got to what you're doing today.
Sure, that'd be great. So I'm Kevin. I live in Park City, Utah, which is a terrible place to be, I tell you.
Yeah, it's horrible, especially in the wintertime.
Horrible. Moved here from Washington, D.C. about 5 years ago, so it's better here. So my e-commerce journey actually started outside of e-commerce. After business school, I ended up being an operator for venture and angel-funded businesses in the Washington, D.C. area. Sort of the joke would be if you needed an operator or a COO with an unhealthy tolerance for risk, I'd be your guy. A lot of fascinating, crazy companies and services in all kinds of different areas. But through that experience, I saw just an enormous amount of money wasted. Through people diving into ideas with a lot of funding and a lot of heart, but really not having thought it through very well. And I had the misfortune to end up being the last man standing at a few of those. And as social media started to rise in about 2013, 2014, I saw it as an opportunity to test ideas without really committing to them fully. So I came up with a thesis that I jokingly call the mini minimum viable product. We hear a lot about minimum viable products. What's the minimal amount of work you can put into something to have a functional product? Well, I didn't even go that far. I was using social media to test concepts by essentially throwing them into a crowded room in social media and seeing if anybody cared about it. And lo and behold, it worked really well. And then I paired that with a strategy of acquiring intellectual property. So I would find utility patents that were out there on the marketplace or available through my network. I'd license them or I'd outright buy them. And then I'd develop initially digitally native brands based on those. So advertising direct to consumers through Facebook, Google, whatever it may be. Over time, that evolved a little bit into more of an agency structure where we had the capacity internally to manage multiple brands. And we decided to start selling into more traditional retail. And as Damon will tell you, traditional retail and e-commerce are not necessarily that compatible, but we were relatively successful in selling into major domestic and international retailers. Eventually, we were selling omni-channel in over 52 countries with our last product. And we had the pleasure of selling it to a private equity group last year or so. Nice. Along the line, I developed a pretty deep expertise in digital marketing. And since the sale of the company, and actually a little bit beforehand, I've been working within a technical group of Facebook called Facebook Marketing Partners Technical Services. It's a fantastic name, but there's a very small number of agencies that have been tapped to do what you would call signals intelligence. So interpreting and clarifying the data coming from individual websites that's being sent to Facebook in particular, but we also work with other major platforms to make sure that the data going into their algorithm can feed the algorithm in such a way that the results of the algorithm are quite good. So good data in, good data out. It's remarkable how messed up this is. There are tens of thousands of direct-to-consumer brands that are out there, and Facebook estimates that 30% plus of them are sending inadequate data signals back to the platform. That impacts the hive mind's ability to process that data and get to the promised land, which was you put a quarter in, you put a message up, and the Zuckerberg machine will spit out sales at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. That it is. Whenever someone starts talking about Facebook, it always amazes me how that has really changed. I mean, just the evolution of the company itself, and the way that now there's so much marketing that happens on there. It still just boggles my mind.
It is the most remarkable marketing platform ever created, for sure. Yeah. And we're going to talk about things in a little bit about that are going to denude some of its ability, but that's still not going to change. No one has ever devised a machine that can reach individual customers at the scale and nuance that Facebook has been able to. And I have reservations from a consumer privacy perspective as far as what that means. But as a marketer, it has presented and hopefully will continue to present an opportunity for me to message to a very precise subgroup of customers that otherwise would just be unobtainable.
Yeah. And that's really for the people that don't understand what, the marketer's panacea is really understanding your ideal client or potential customer and targeting them directly. And that's one of the things that I think Facebook has taken to a whole nother level in their ability to do that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's one of the, in my mind, that's what I think about them. I mean, Google's one way, and there's other platforms that do it, but I think Facebook has really done a nice job of that.
So I think that one thing that's very important for people to understand is that there is, of course, a linear relationship to your actions on Facebook, the things that you like, the things that you engage in, and the sort of ads that they're going to provide to you. What most people don't necessarily realize is that is actually a very small portion of their overall targeting portfolio. So if they are going to put audiences together, yes, sure, they're going to start there. Like, I'm a member of a mountain bike forum, so you know that I'm into mountain biking. And yes, ads can be served to me related to mountain biking to men of a certain age. But that's a very small piece of the information that they're getting. They have for fee or in data exchange type of relationships with huge publishers across the web so that they can understand what me as an individual user does on other sites, because as we all know, Facebook has matured. It's not there's a cohort of people who it is their primary access to the internet and everything they do. Most people have some presence there, but spend most of their time in other parts of the web. So Facebook's brilliance really is managing to get the signals that aren't necessarily on Facebook, so we call those third-party signals, and incorporate them into, again, their hive mind, so that they can develop a much more thorough identity for an individual customer. Now, this sounds a little bit horrifying, and the media likes to portray it as a horrifying thing, but there are flip sides to it, that it can be misused. People do micro-level tracking and really horrendous things that I think expose individuals to messages that they don't want to hear. But it also allows their web experience to be tailored to their interests. If Facebook didn't know my interests, that I was into the outdoors and into skiing and things like that, it would be a much more genericized view of who I am as a customer. And the people who do genericized advertising generally are the old broadcast type giant brands. It would be the Fords, the insurance companies, healthcare, pharmaceuticals. So as opposed to getting niche mountain bike ads all the time, I'm going to get AstraZeneca ads and Ford F-150 ads and whatever it may be that may not really be that relevant to me. That's not really good for me as a consumer to discover new things, and it's certainly not very good for brands.
Yeah. Well, especially too, I mean, for Ford or somebody like that, or a big brand that knows, hey, we just have to blanket advertise, and it's more about getting periodically out to everyone, right? But for a niche brand, if you're in a mountain biking industry and you've got the greatest accessory for a mountain bike or the greatest mountain bike, you can't advertise like that. You have to, it's monetarily, you cannot afford to advertise like that. And even if you could, it wouldn't provide the returns that you want. So you need to niche down into the right people.
So,
and they want it for that, in that kind of in for most part.
And that's where things are about to start changing. So we can bridge into privacy a little bit. The main topic of conversation there is, of course, Apple. And you'll hear about iOS 14. Specifically, it's iOS 14.5, which is in the works, and it is in beta.
Yeah,
so,
it's not there yet because I think I was just on 14.42 or 3 or something like that.
Most of us aren't, but I can tell you we look at 30 million points of data a week at the moment, and it is out there and it is live in a minority of phones. So we'll back up just a little bit.
Okay.
You have these behemoths that are out there. In this case, we're going to talk about the Facebook, the Google, and the Apple, right? And 2 out of the 3 of those make the vast majority of their revenue through advertising. One of them is a luxury item, a very expensive luxury item. And Tim Cook, very, very cleverly, I would say, is differentiating his product set by incorporating privacy as a feature or a benefit, both, into the product, and saying, hey, Google, an Android device is going to collect 400 points of data on you basically every second, and it's going to be monetizing that. You are the product, and that leads to terrible things because the advertisers are all out to get you. I don't 100% disagree with that, by the way, but the data is very useful to advertisers to get the relevant messages to you. So Tim Cook says, hey, we're gonna give our users this feature that allows them to opt out of this second stage tracking that's going on. That if an individual drifts into one environment, yes, it's kind of free game to see what they're doing. They've opted, they're reading the stories, whatever it is. Like, that's the trade-off in modern media. But we're going to give them the opportunity to opt out of this wider universe of tracking that exists that I was mentioning earlier. And it's particularly Facebook that has this enormous universe of data exchanges that are going on in terms of third-party data. So they have instituted something that they are calling the App Transparency Tracker, which is the ATT prompt. I actually never ever pronounce it. It is the yes, which is going to launch in iOS 14.5, and it'll simply pop up on your Facebook screen and any other app that shares data or shares what's known as the IDFA, which is the individual unit identifier for your phone, like it's your phone's fingerprint, essentially. If that information is being shared outside of its own universe, a proactive prompt will pop up on your screen and say something along the lines of, do you want this app to be able to share your data and track you across the web? And most sane people seeing that warning pop up are going to click heck no and opt out. Okay. So inside Facebook, and remember, I'm privy to a pretty high level of development within Facebook. Conservatively, they estimate that 60% of iOS users are going to opt out. Now, getting back to the business model for a second, there is a broader issue here, which is what's really going on. Is this just a product strategy by Tim Cook, or is there something else going on? And there's definitely something else going on. They're trying to regain control of the App Store. It's like a whole nother set of topics, but they've basically lost control of product distribution. It's a distribution challenge that when the App Store launched, you would go to the App Store and Apple could curate that and match you as an advertiser to various apps so that they could encourage distribution of specific apps. They lost control of that because advertisers realized that it was easier to make a two-step shuffle and do their advertising directly on Facebook or Google or wherever they were doing their advertising, and then push people through the App Store more as an afterthought. So the App Store was just kind of an inconvenient step in the middle there, as opposed to being the distribution channel that it was designed to be when Apple came out. So by doing away with Facebook's ability to be useful in terms of being an app-based advertiser, they probably feel that they can regain control of this. Now, antitrust is absolutely in the air about this. When you hear the wise people talking about this, you can hear their testimony. You can hear it like as they're playing it about what Apple is doing, and they are self-dealing. The advertiser that isn't impacted, it's Apple. Apple users can't opt out of Apple data usage without going through a whole bunch of hoops. So the advertiser that's most affected, it's Facebook. Facebook and Apple don't particularly get along, and this is very punitive against Facebook.
Okay. So basically for me as an Apple user, I'm just, if I've got an app on my phone and it's going to go to different places after I'm out of that app, and it's going to track those and send them back to the app developer, it's going to ask me if I want that to be done or not. Yes, it is.
So think about this for a minute. The modern adage is, if the product's free, you're the product, right?
Yep.
So that's the agreement, as it were, between the advertisers and the users. So once people start to opt out of these apps, their monetization model is simply going to start to fall apart. So one of the macro effects from this is you're going to see more paywalls start popping up, that free content. It's going to be tough for an app to maintain free content if they can't do advertising. So you'll start seeing, hey, it's nice that you were using whatever this particular app is, but now this is going to cost you $1.99 a month. Who does that benefit? Who is that processed through? It's Apple, because Apple takes a 30% cut of all of those revenues that pass through their store. So they win there. They might lose a little bit on advertising dollars, but they're the winner as those paywalls start coming up. Because all of the apps are stuck in the store behind their walled garden and are going to be forced to pay their toll, as it were. Side. So that's one of the macro effects we're going to see from this. So I'll break it down. Like, I don't want to drift too far away from this, because from a practical perspective, whether you're the leader of the organization or a media buyer or somewhere involved in the organization, this is going to impact all brands in some way, shape, or form. And on the one side are the macro effects, and the macro effects from this are simply data science. That if 60% of iOS users are no longer transmitting their data into the algorithms that create the audiences that optimize things, those algorithms aren't going to work as well as they're supposed to. So you'll see a decline in efficacy as far as the results that are being yielded from the platforms, just on a natural basis. The next macro effect is likely going to be, the paywalls that we talked about earlier. And it could follow across in other surprising directions. So there are plenty of for-profit relationships that are going on with that event communication that you weren't even aware of. That you see the Ford ad in the side, and you get that, it's there, but that site is collecting your data and they're selling it back to Facebook. So it's not just that app you're reading. It's not just the Facebook app or whatever the cute app is, a weather app or whatever it might be. Now you're going to start to see paywalls popping up in content that's all over the place. From a micro perspective, and I'm not going to go into the weeds here, I promise. I'll keep you out. This is good. The amount of signals that advertisers are going to get are going to be severely limited. And I'm generally a D2C, a direct-to-consumer advertiser, but it will affect any type of advertiser, particularly those who have complex or long funnels where there's a lot going on in their funnel. Most modern advertisers rely on the advertising platform that they're working with in order to optimize. And what's going to happen is the data that's being fed from the individual site to that platform is going to be delayed and highly restrictive, not necessarily just from these users who have opted out of the ATT, but from a platform perspective, it's just too complex for them to deal with it. So already you see Facebook limiting what we call the attribution window, which is the amount of time between a click the first clicky on the site,
Yeah.
and a conversion to only 7 days. So if you're selling cars or real estate or something that or business to business services that relies on a long attribution cycle, your dashboard is just going to be missing that information. It's also going to be randomized as somewhere between 24 and 72 hours. So people like me tend to manage dozens and dozens of campaigns with dozens of with ad sets under the campaigns and ads that are under there, and we optimize on a daily basis based on the information that we're getting. Well, those signals are going to start to just go away. And first off, the signals that on the Apple side will only roll up to the campaign level. So in your advertising accounts, again, campaigns, ad sets, ads. You optimize the ads. But the information is going to be at some random point in the last 24 to 72 hours, the most important event that you're telling us. So probably a purchase in the case of a consumer brand, or a lead in the case of a B2B brand. At some point, one of these ads under here might have delivered something. So it's almost worth a pause, because if you're out there buying ads and you're spending any significant dollars on ads, just imagine what your world looks like if you can only look at the campaign level. Worse, they are restricting the ability of advertisers, and will be, to create multiple campaigns, because the obvious hustler move here is, okay, well, I'll just create one campaign with one ad set with one ad for each of my different ideas. First off, that would be a huge pain to do, but no, it's going to end up being against Facebook policy at some point, and trying to skirt around issues like that are just not the right answer. So that's on a micro level. That's one of the things that's going to start happening. Now, targeting is also going to start falling apart. And this is less manageable on a micro level. But let's just take a random example. I'm not a big football fan, so I apologize if I step on somebody's toes here. But imagine that you are an online retailer who was selling cheeseheads, Green Bay Packers like cheeseheads. The promise of modern digital marketing is you could drill down and you could find those cheesehead fans because they were going to whatever the Green Bay Packer forum is, and you know that they live in Green Bay and they're like a guy of a certain age, and you could drive them right into this like Packers type environment. You might be an NFL swag type business, whatever it might be, and you can drive them in there. Now you're going to lose all of those other signals. You're going to lose them gradually. So it's going to feel like a boiling frog, because data signals on the internet are preserved for, in general, 180 days through a cookie. And as the cookies start to expire for people opting out, that information is just going to go away. So after 180 days, after that cheesehead is opted out, you're no longer going to know anything but what he was doing in the Facebook environment. And he might have been involved he might be on a Packers page, or he might be on an NFL page or something like that, but it's going to be really hard to find as many of those people as it was previously. So if you're that advertiser, you need to rejigger the way that you're looking at your messaging, and you're going to have to go up the funnel, which is a little horrifying if you're someone selling a silly cheesehead, because you're going to be mixing your messages. You're going to put people into the middle of an environment that isn't going to be as consumer friendly for them.
Well, and as consumers, we're used to getting the cheesehead stuck to us, because if we're a friend, if we're a cheesehead fan, if we're a Green Bay Packers fan, we're used to getting Green Bay Packers advertising. You just get used to it. I mean, I see Seahawks stuff all the time, because they obviously I'm on the Seahawks stuff, and this is really something, because two things, for the D2C brand or B2B, doesn't really matter. How the heck are you going to measure conversions if it's only if it's a 7-day window between a click and they come back and buy only within 7 days? Hell, that's a lot of times, if something's more than a discretionary purchase of 20, 30, 50, not more than $100, people spend more time than that just thinking about it.
Absolutely. And
so
you're reacting to that. I would see your bright eyes like.
No, it's just right. Yeah, that would drive me crazy because all of a sudden now, I used to get conversion data and it was 90 days, and that's pretty good in most D2C environments. If they're not, they'll be back if they're not, but that's a reasonable amount of time, right? But if it's going to be 7 days, you can be throwing money in. It's like throwing money in the wind. You have no idea if they actually converted or not.
So if you're optimizing ads, you're really only going to be able to optimize after that 72-hour window. So you will have wasted a lot of money in between. Part of the reason that Facebook is restricting the number of overall campaigns that you can have is because internally, they're basically taking up kind of ghost campaigns that they're going to be running in the background that are machine learning based campaigns. So you may have 10 going, but they may have 90 more that are going, that are trying to mash it up and trying to make sense of this. They are relying very heavily on this idea that privacy is moving in this direction. Absolutely is. So we have to get away from individual identification that's identifiable through, whatever it may be in their third-party data, and trying to create more anonymized cohorts and groupings of consumers that you can push traffic into. Mm-hmm. But just superficially, that you run into the cheesehead problem again, that, you're going to end up with males from certain states that like football, but Steelers versus Packers versus Seahawks, it's going to be very hard to figure that out. So I do, as somebody who views themselves as a technical marketer, I'll say that the solutions to this are almost a flashback, that when all of these things started, the reporting dashboards were horrendous. And to be honest, the reporting dashboards now are not terribly accurate. Go back all the way to the beginning of this conversation when I was telling you about data signals. Like, there is a big mismatch between the sort of data that you are sending from your site and what Facebook is either anticipating or Google is anticipating, and you will almost always see large misalignments between these. So one outcome of it is that they've recognized that this is a problem, and they are leaning very heavily on API-based connections to sites as opposed to pixel-based sites. Yep. Pixels are a line of code that sits somewhere on your site that collect information and then ship it off to wherever they're told to ship it off, versus an API, which is actually a data connection that ships that information off and is far more reliable. So we see somewhere between 8 and 25% increase in conversion accuracy when you're shipping data via an API versus shipping it via Pixel. So it's one of those things that if you're trying to troubleshoot what the heck is going on here, getting involved in the conversion API process early is important. And at some point, it's going to be required. The problem is this is not easy. Like, now you're talking SQL databases and data collection and on-site pixels, because that data still needs to be collected, and then your pixel isn't configured correctly, or it's not firing rapidly enough, so it's not catching all the information, so you're sending garbage information back up. So they're absolutely going to insist on getting this information in this form, but we're seeing that most of the implementations that they're recommending right now are inadequate. So they work okay if you're that cheesehead guy and you're just pushing your message out and it's converting and coming back. Not a huge deal. Where it falls apart is in those longer tail engagements, or engagements where you're trying to measure a whole bunch of events that are happening, subscription models, upsells, downsells, cart actions, things like that. I can't say this unequivocally, but I don't think I've seen a plain Jane implementation of the conversion APIs that capture all that stuff. So Shopify, one of the major e-commerce platforms, has put out a solution, but it doesn't really work the way it's supposed to. So this puts the small business owner or the small advertiser in this place where they're trying to play tech geek, and it's tough. It is really, really tough. So what I was referencing as far as the way we used to do it is this is the way we used to do it, where we would gather all the information on a first party basis and we would make our decisions based on that aggregated data from a whole bunch of different sources as far as how to allocate our funds. And it would be very granular. We would be like targeting T-Mobile users of Android phones just happened to be working, and we could isolate that as an audience and go after them, but it required enormous amounts of data collection.
Yeah.
And frankly, a lot of smaller advertisers, and by smaller, I mean advertisers spending less than about $1 million a year. So we're not talking particularly small, generally migrated over to the platforms because they were reasonably accurate. They were much more user-friendly. The information was right there. The graphical interface is quite good and continues to improve. So they drifted away from that, and the skill sets drifted away from that. If you wanted to be a technical digital marketer in 2013 or 2014, you had to be part data scientist, basically, to really execute on a high level. And it's a boon for brand marketers because they could focus on their brand and less on the technicalities of the whole thing. Well, now I think we're really going to see a sea change in the way that advertisers have to go about collecting their data and understanding their data and having a single source of truth and trust in that data in order to make actionable decisions. Because it's important to point out here that the internet in part runs on being able to collect user type data from individual visitors to the site. That configures everything from the resolution you're seeing on your screen, special options that pop up. That's sort of a building block to how the web works. So it is still free. It's still permissible with permission. You see the cookie boxes that pop up on sites to collect that data, as long as you're not doing anything that's outside of the scope of your agreement, like selling the data somewhere or remarketing to it, whatever it is. You need the ability to use that data yourself. So you have to figure out how you're going to collect that data and how you're going to store that data. And then 30 million points of data that we're getting just from one brand a week, now you need to make sense of it.
Yeah.
There's a real challenge there for an SME type brand or even a small agency that's trying to figure all this out for being able to manage it.
Because so I'm going to put it in layman terms. You can help me through this, because what we're saying is basically it's going to go back to the point to where you got to do a lot of the data analysis that was being done by, say, a Facebook, because you need to see the people that are coming to your sites, where they're going, what they're doing, that kind of stuff yourself, rather than take the data from a platform like a Facebook.
Yes. So the flow currently would be the data flows into Facebook. If you're doing it right, the API flows from your site to Facebook, and then generally you have a data visualization tool that's collecting attribution data, like a Tableau or a Google Data Studio, whatever it might be. And you've built your dashboards that look in on that. That's how the brands do this. Often they'll have their own bespoke sort of systems, but you can't do that anymore because the data that's being passed from the site to the platform will be inadequate for a large swath of your data population. And we have been talking about Apple. So when this starts, it's going to be the Apple opted out users. So one way to triage this for your brand is to trot over to Google Analytics and take a look at two easy points of data. What percentage of your data is coming from Apple users? And two, how much do you care about long attribution periods? Like if 9.8% of your sales are on day one, you're still going to have the ad optimization problems, but it's not going to be as big a deal. But if you have all these sales that are happening on day 28 or day 82 or whatever it is, or if you're doing anything complicated, because it gets lost in this a little bit, but Facebook is only going to be accepting a small amount of data from even the API. So you're going to lose a lot of the granular stuff that geeks like me like to look at as far as the other events that are with, say you're doing a Google Tag Manager implementation and you're looking at scroll and all of these other cool goals that, if you buy this and then, or if you click on this and this and this, and then that leads to a cohort that makes some sort of sense. That's not going to be communicated. So you have to be gathering the data and then putting it in a format that BI tool, the business intelligence tool, whatever it might be, can make sense of. And it is an enormous data challenge to figure out.
Yeah. Wow. So this is a hell of a change is coming.
So back in about 2012, I think it was a little bit before my digital marketing time, actually, when the SEO hammer came down with Google. There were all of these business models that were built on this idea of attainable search engine indexing, right? Thousands and thousands of small businesses and people figuring it out, sometimes disingenuously, sometimes genuinely, like, this was the way it was done to develop relevance, and Google just smashed it, and it just destroyed a huge swath of small businesses that had to figure out how this was going to work. And it's taken them years to figure it out, and more or less only the strongest survived, or the people with the right skill set came out of it, because the new skill set was quite a bit more rarefied and complicated. And I think that that's what we're going to see in terms of more of digital marketing going forward, because it's not going to be just Apple. I mean, Google's going to have to follow they are going to be retiring cookies in the next 2 years. And there's going to be a lot of machine learning that's based on these audiences. But this idea that you could start a business that is, maybe it's a side hustle, maybe it's a real business that sells something silly like cheeseheads, and make it work because you can cost effectively attract those people, it's not going to work. So what do we do? What do we do as marketers? One, right now, as of 6 months ago, focus on customer CRM data as much as you possibly can. So trying to develop first-party traffic and first-party pieces of data, be it a cell phone number, always with permission, of course. Getting people's opt-in through solid content, through really engaging them, and get as many points of contact as you possibly can, because once you have that email from the legit format, or you have that SMS, now you have means of marketing to them through owned media, and you can kind of avoid this problem because the industry half the industry is going to tell you that ads are going to get really cheap because nobody's going to be able to advertise, and the other half of the industry is going to say that it's going to get really expensive because nobody's going to be able to optimize. I fall kind of on the expensive side, because I think that the brand advertisers aren't going away, and they're perfectly happy spending tens of millions of dollars directionally as opposed to on a granular basis. And it's all based on an auction system, and the little guys are going to get priced out, and they're going to have to buy a lot more eyes, cheesehead. You have to buy a lot of NFL eyes to get to that cheesehead audience that might be contained in there. So one is owned audience. Two is audience retention. So given the customers that you already have, like, you need to treat them very, very well. They're your asset going forward. You need to give them what they need. You need to not make them angry. You need to keep them on your lists. And one of the mechanisms of that is going to be high levels of personalization. And we are heading into just an amazing age as far as being able to provide very, very highly personal products to people. And because they're your customer, you know a lot more about them. It might be a dog breed type thing. It might be a jersey, whatever it is, but a high level of personalization in that experience. In general, if you're starting a new product, steering away from niche focus and steering more to a broad market appeal is going to be important. So
but now let's just stop there for a second. Everyone you talk to in e-commerce talks about niching down right now. So you're saying that in order to be effective, that's not going to work anymore because it's going to be too hard to hit that audience.
Yep. After a while, it will be.
after a while. But I mean,
wow. So that's why the retention and the retention in the CRM are so important right now, that you know who your niche audiences are. So you need to hold on to them. But if you wanted to reach a new version of them, it's going to be tough. And we don't quite know how it's going to play out. Quite yet.
That's pretty scary for people that have spent, tens of millions of dollars to niche down into very profitable groups of people and continue to market to those groups heavily. Because what happens if you should be shaking in your shoes if that goes away tomorrow?
Yep.
Your golden goose might be gone.
So, the next bit is, what do you do? How do you play this game? And the macro issues with it are going to remain. Like, these are trillion-dollar companies, literally, and they have some of the smartest people in the world working for them, and they are putting enormous resources into figuring this out. So, to a degree, the attitude that they're going to figure it out, it might be directionally accurate. I think there's going to be a lot more friction and pain in that process than people expect, and it could present a great deal of opportunity over the next 6 months or so as this stuff starts rolling out. Or there could be an antitrust suit against Apple, and there could be an injunction, and nothing's going to happen. Even so, I strongly encourage our clients and big brands that I talk to, even anybody who views themselves as a reasonably sophisticated digital marketer, you need to own your data. That data is an asset. You've been giving it away to all of these platforms because it's easier to do that. And it's time to figure out how you can retain that data on a first-party basis, even if you don't fully know how to do it, because once it goes away, it's going to go away. And if you have the database of all the hits and all the events that are happening on your website, and you grow to a point that it makes sense, it's better to have it than not to have it. And even if nothing happens in this privacy, you now have a single source with this privacy issue, which I don't want to use a double negative, but nothing is not going to happen. Something is going to develop out of it. So now you have a much more sophisticated view of your marketing activities in a platform agnostic sort of way. And it might be blending in a whole bunch of different channels so you can better see it as an operator. If you're the CEO or the director of marketing, like, you want to be able to see that level of rolled up detail that's not like, oh, how's this platform doing, and how's that platform doing, and what's happening over here, and where's this lead going, and who knows. So I think that rigor is good for marketing. It's easy for me to say, like, oh, I know what I'm doing, and I came in at a time when it was easier to learn these skills, and now it should be harder for new entrants. But there's a lot of bad behavior in digital marketing, with unethical advertisers who are doing bad things with the data that they have. They're offering really unfortunate products. It's bad news, and to a degree, cleaning that out a little bit and professionalizing it is something that the industry needs.
It's a good thing. So when you talk about retaining the first party data, now, are you talking about the actual people that are visiting the websites and domains you own? That's what you're talking about, collecting it and going, okay, Damon, this IP address just hit my website, and they went to these 3 pages on my site for this long. Is that the kind of data you're talking about, or what data are you talking about collecting?
So we try and stitch together data based on common identifiers and identifiers that we create, and this is easily a technical rabbit hole. But we try and find, like, what is, for Facebook, they call it a click ID, the FBCLID. So every time something happens on Facebook, that is transmitted, and we can catch that on the site. And then we capture a whole massive string of event data of the things that they're doing on the site, because we know that Facebook is no longer going to be retaining those events. So if we want to be able to track, did somebody subscribe or an upsell Did they upsell? They passed on upsell 1, but they bought on upsell 2. That's exactly the sort of data that's going to get lost. So we can track that within that individual data stream, and then using the common identifiers that are in there, anonymized to not retain any PII, personally identifiable information. We can stitch that data together in a way that helps us better understand that customer's journey and whether or not they're converting even outside of those attribution windows. It gets far more complicated under the hood, but we can tell. Multi-platform attribution is still really tough. Like if somebody goes through Facebook and they go through Google, but we will have a very good idea of a multiple site visit type person who's coming to our site and what they're doing, and how we can maximize that experience for them.
Wow. And currently, that's basically, that kind of stuff is a lot of the stuff that Facebook or Google provides now, but it's going to be much less efficient when these changes come into play. I'm trying to simplify it here for myself and for somebody listening, because this is going to be scary for the smaller, well, for the big people, obviously. I mean, if you're not going to be doing a system like this and you're not collecting data now, it'd be a scary thing to be the CEO of a company. It'd be something to keep you up at night. That's for sure. Because if you're able to, put a quarter in and money comes out the backside in product sales, it's not going to be there.
I think it's scary for agencies as well, that on the smaller side, a lot of brands are agency dependent.
Yeah.
And agencies, although I'm finding that some of them are aware of this, there's sort of a stick your head in the sand sort of approach.
Really?
To it. It's relying on the platforms to figure it out. There's a proper alignment of incentives. Facebook has to figure this out. But there's this sort of underlying sentiment that, they're still going to kind of do it under the table and whatnot. No, I don't think so. They can't collude. They really need to avoid antitrust. And Apple's, just look at Epic Games, the war that's going on with Apple and the App Store with Epic. They're not messing around. Like they're going to go to the mat on this, and Tim Cook and Zuckerberg don't have a whole lot of love lost between them. So, I wouldn't count on this just resolving itself. It's at least going to get ugly for a period as we all figure it out.
Wow. This is really interesting. It's enthralling to me. Because being in e-commerce and not understanding this, and then too with the clients that I'm usually working with are B2B clients, and they're usually some of these in manufacturing. This is a really long cycle that you go through. I mean, months and months and months, and this is going to be something. It's going to be something the way this changes. But you had a couple things that I heard that was really, at least for the short term, is get on Google and just figure out how many iOS users you have. First of all, maybe you're lucky and it's 2% of your total, which is not, but maybe you get lucky, and that might help you for a while. But this overall, man, this is really a challenge that people are going to have to come to terms with in the near future.
Sure. And be aware when this starts rolling out that you may see changes within your accounts, and you need to be paying attention to them for sure, because it could get out of control in a hurry. So I'm almost an evangelist for this. Just spread the word that you do need to pay attention. And some of the brightest people in digital advertising, they're very worried about this for sure. It's been really fun about that. So Clubhouse, the only place I hang out on Clubhouse are these like really wonky ad tech type rooms. And I just kind of sit there with my pen and like, oh my gosh, really? Oh, really? Oh, they're talking to them. It's a fascinating thing. And these are the folks who run like programmatic media for Time. These are not small jobs, and they are all worried. And when I see them worried, and I see Facebook developers on like these technical training type things that we do, and they're literally sweating. Like, I don't know what happens when we lose 30 or 40% of our data. Like, the system wasn't built for that.
Yeah. Wow. It's going to be a change, isn't it? It's a scary but exciting time as well, because you've been obviously working on stuff to collect this data, and you even went out and looked, and you think there may be a product involved in this.
Yeah, that is definitely where I've landed. So we saw the need for this for 6 months ago or so. We saw the writing on the wall. We were part of this program. I mean, they literally wrote it on the wall, like, you need something, on the whiteboard. So we started looking for solutions for this. And given the volume of data that our clients deal with, we just couldn't find anything. There are reporting tools out there. There are tools that do the conversion, the conversion API transmission, but we just couldn't find anything that did the level of data stitching that we were going to need to get that single source of truth. So we've spent the last 5 months developing that. And we now have, the whole thing is in beta. We have, actually, it'll be about 12 different clients who are involved in it. And the profile of the clients are interesting. These are going to be cutting edge, direct response type marketers who live and breathe by this data and know that they're going to need it in 6 months. So it's an awfully nice type of client to find. Most people are going to wait for there to be pain, and then they're going to sit around and look for a solution. But we have the advantage of having created it. It's launched, it's working, it's doing all the things that it's supposed to do. Clients are using our system. We can renew cookies for up to 180 days, so you can get that long tail tracking. We have basically unlimited events that you can track within the system. It's very robust. And we kind of looked at each other just a few months ago and we're like, well, this is kind of a neat thing. I bet that there are going to be, 10,000 medium-sized businesses out there that are going to need this next year. And although there are others who do parts of it, nobody has put together the entire thing.
Wow.
So we're forming up into a real product, and that we hope that we can offer soon, actually. That it's more not, I'm not going to say mass market, but that is out of that rarefied section of like crazy data. Like right now, it's this nebulous, crazy database, and they don't want any of our visualization tools because they have their own. They're like, no, numbers, please. And there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes for stitching all of that together. And there's where our intellectual property is, I guess. But to turn it into a product that a smaller brand, a brand that's spending $25,000, $50,000 a month. And I totally recognize that for a lot of people, that's like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine spending that much money. That they can pick up pieces of this that would be usable to them. And I have a bit of a maybe pie in the sky dream that there's another aspect of this where we can almost become data therapists and start working with more data science type people to help brands, probably not that small, but mid-sized brands, understand that data a little bit more, because it's great to ship them 30 million points of data. But even the media buyer might be very technical, but they're not really going to know how to make much sense. So turning that into a larger business where we can really serve as a coach and a guide. And we sort of joke that it's like, digital media buying therapist. Like, am I doing the right thing? Yeah, you're doing the right thing. It's looking good. You're doing the right thing. But most importantly, we're equipping those brands with that data that they own, that's transportable. We're not trying to do anything that's behind the scenes as far as like catching their data. And that's the other thing that you're going to see coming forward, is there are a bunch of opportunistic type of platforms that are going to be all about that data.
They're going to want to collect it themselves and aggregate it.
You would not believe how often that we see pixels that are buried within like Shopify apps. People pick up random apps, and those apps are stealing their customer data, essentially. Shopify has a relatively weak approval process. File that away. Like, I'm a Shopify fanboy. I'm a shareholder. Like, I love Shopify, but they need to tighten that up, because the sort of information that is leaking out the edges of Shopify is pretty horrifying.
Wow. Yeah. Because I as you said that, I was envisioning that very thing. It's like, hey, we'll help you do this, and we'll be able to, but they're collecting your data, and then now they've got your data to sell along with everyone else that they say they're doing this, and come in with a low price model that'll help people, but they're helping themselves to the data on the other end of it as well.
Yep. So know who you're buying from.
Yeah. Yes, good stuff. Well, Kevin, this is awesome. I love to geek out on this stuff a bit because I really think that we are at a really interesting point because we've gone through the whole, Facebook has gone that, and Google has too. Google's just, I believe, a different approach, obviously, and other things. But the digital advertising and the pay-per-click is such an advanced thing, and now seeing how this is going to flip it's just like turning it on its head. It's going to be turning it on its head. We're going to see what's going to happen in the next year after this. So good stuff, man. I love the conversation. So if people want to reach out and talk to you a little bit more about this, I don't understand half of it. I'm glad that you humor me and turn it into the simple words that I can understand on this, but it's awesome talking about this. If someone wants to reach out to you, it's best to just message you on LinkedIn or connect with you on LinkedIn, Kevin Williams, and that's a good way.
Sure, or Kevin at discoverymarketing.io is my email.
Discoverymarketing.io. Awesome. Well, Kevin, anything else to add? Anything I should add? Anything that we should be telling people that are listening that they really need to know that we haven't told them yet today about this?
They just need to be paying attention. They need to pay attention as this rolls out. There is some low odds possibility that it's all going to be totally rosy, but I don't need a lot of people in my area, at least, to think that. And look for opportunities, I think, as well.
Yeah.
You're in the sales and acquisition business.
Yeah.
I tell you, as somebody who's involved in that a little bit too, it has put a little bit of a lens on the type of opportunities that I'm looking at. That is this a business that's so highly dependent on these platforms? Does it have a whole bunch of its own owned media? Like those are, and if you're using an agency, ask your agency what their plan is. They need to have a plan. A lot of agencies are super creative and they're really good at buying, but they need to know how this is going to play out. Or how they at least have a plan B, like hoping that nothing's going to go wrong. Okay, fine, but hope for the best, plan for the worst.
Yeah,
this would be the right saying. And if you are a sizable Facebook advertiser, you probably have a rep. Talk to your rep about this. Facebook actually pays our firm directly to do some of these implementations for big brands. So they're so serious about it that Facebook writes the check. It's not actually the brands who write the check. There's just a small group of firms that can receive that business, but and know that LinkedIn, Google, other major platforms are skirting around this on the edges, and it's very unclear how that's going to play out. Facebook is by far the most dependent on independent signals on how it optimizes, and that's part of what makes it so effective. But LinkedIn is saying, oh, this is no big deal. We've removed the IDFA from our data, so therefore we comply, and you don't need to pop up the ATT prompt. Maybe. We'll see. They have a lot of internal data they're using, and it's considered first-party data because they're focused on people on their platform. But just be aware of ancillary effects all over the place. And this is also compounded by things in Europe with GDPR, privacy concerns. California, they're staying abreast of privacy concerns is tough. It's a business.
Yeah, and it's in like you said many times now, it's just changing so much. It's so much. Well, Kevin, it's been awesome to have you here. Thanks again, and it'll be interesting to maybe talk later this year, early in 2022, and see what really has transpired, because this is just like it's could be the Wild West again for a while.
Yep.
And, good stuff. Well, Kevin, thanks so much for being here again. Thanks everyone for listening to us today on The Faces of Business. We will be back here again next Tuesday at 3:05 p.m. Pacific time. We'll see you then. Thanks.